Welcome to today's webinar, How Student Ridership Can Help Your School Accurately Claim Your Special Needs Student Transportation Medicaid Reimbursement, presented by Synovia Solutions. I'm Josh DeLucia with School Bus Fleet, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. I encourage you to ask questions during the webinar at any point, and we will try to address them all. However, if we do not get to yours, don't worry, you'll be contacted by email with a response after the event. Our presenters today are Jeannie, who's a transportation manager with Loudoun County, Virginia Public Schools, Jessica Rod, the Associate Solutions Manager with Public Consulting Group, Andy Gall, an account executive with Synovia Solutions, and Brian Mitchell, who is also with Synovia Solutions in their marketing team. Jeannie is a respected veteran of the student transportation industry with more than a decade of experience across several school districts. She's familiar with GPS fleet tracking technology and ancillary technologies like student ridership and school bus tracking parent-facing applications. Jessica serves as the national lead over all school-based fee-for-service and direct claiming for Public Consulting Group. She supports over 1,650 school districts across 26 states with compliance, reimbursement optimization, and program expansion. She has more than 15 years of experience working with school districts and state agencies on Medicaid claiming. Jessica graduated from Vassar College with a bachelor's in economics and English and currently lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. Andy has extensive student transportation experience with 7 years serving in a variety of technology, support, and customer-facing roles with Synovia Solutions. Andy previously held a variety of roles at Zionsville Public Schools in Indiana for nearly 20 years, including data management and technology integration. Today, he helps school bus fleets improve their safety, service, and efficiency with Synovia's suite of digital tools. Brian is the head of marketing at Synovia with more than 20 years of experience in marketing, journalism, and as a Navy officer with service around the world. He holds bachelor's degrees in Spanish and Communications from the University of Tennessee and a master's degree from Oklahoma University. He will serve as moderator for this webinar. Now, I'll hand it over to Brian.
Josh, thank you very much. Thank you to all our participants across the country joining us today. I know it's a very chaotic time for all of you as we, as a nation, face the challenge of COVID and back to school and all the different ways our states and counties and districts are managing it. So aware that your time is valuable, we have built what I believe is going to be a very informative presentation for you that will be, at the end of the day, something that you all can take back to your leadership in ways to think about increasing not just the efficiency of the way you do business, but in a best case scenario, increasing your district's bottom line, which hopefully is a message that resonates in the environment we live in where budgets are under quite a bit of stress. With that said, we'd like to get started and move right along. This picture here that you're seeing on the slide is one I took last year, July of 2019 in Cobb County, Georgia. And I use it in most of these presentations. I think it's a great reminder of the shared journey that we are all on, right? From everyone that's on the call who's going to present today to all of you who are listening, it is taking care of those students and their families and helping essentially manage the incredibly high expectations they have, right? Everyone today's got a smart device attached to them 24/7, which can obviously do miraculous things to help improve the way we serve them, but it also raises the bar for all of us. So I like to start this as like a unifying image, because it's got, you know, a mask-free world that I think we all want to return to one of these days, but more importantly, because it's, you know, kids on their way to school. In this picture, they're using the Here Comes the Bus app. I think it's a great reminder of why we all come to work every day is to take care of these families and give them a great experience as their kids go off to school. A little bit about us, Synovia. We are not going to make this a commercial, but we do want to remind you who brought you this information. School Bus Fleet's a great media partner of ours, and we're very proud to work with them. We've been working with them for a long time. We've been in the industry for 19 years. We're going to celebrate our 20th birthday here next year. And when GPS technology was still quite magical, long before we all had smart devices and mapping in our pockets, we were putting GPS units on school buses to help school bus fleets around the country be safer, be smarter, be more efficient. Last year, we were acquired by CalAmp, our parent company, who is not just a leader in telematics, but is a leader in essentially connecting anything that moves, from cargo to vehicles, all over the world. So we're, focused basically in Canada and the US, but our parent company is a global company with a footprint in Asia, Europe, Latin America. So we bring a tremendous amount of expertise in terms of telematics and in bringing intelligence to anything that moves. And in this case, we're talking about the school bus. A lot of you might know us best from our consumer-facing product, Here Comes the Bus. It is the ride-sharing like experience for the school bus, real-time tracking and alerts, launched in 2015. Very proud to have 2.3 million users across the country. More than 370 districts use it. The average account has more than 4 users. And what that means is for every student that is tracked, or every student's bus that is tracked, a parent, a grandparent, a babysitter, a neighbor, an older brother, downloads the app to use. So that's how we got to that 2.3 million users, which I think speaks to the incredible utility of the product. And then Bus Guardian is our new product this year, which is essentially, us repurposing some of our well-known technology to help school districts combat COVID. So that's who we are, and that's our expertise. But more importantly, when we thought about how we tell this story, we knew it had to be more than just Synovia talking about our solution, right? So we went out and we found, most importantly, one of our outstanding customers in Jeannie, who I'm going to let introduce herself in a moment, but also Jessica Rod. And I'm going to let Jessica and Andy introduce themselves real quickly. And I think you'll learn from their introductions, you're going to learn from incredibly experienced people with a vast amount of knowledge in this industry. Jessica?
Thanks, Brian. So again, I'm Jessica Rod with Public Consulting Group. I serve as our National Director over all of our fee-for-service claiming programs across the country. Right now, we serve districts across 26 states. Our record thus far over the 25 years plus that PCG has within this field, we've recovered over $8 billion for our school district clients. As another note, 1 out of every 5 students with special needs is in one of our PCG systems. So we, within Medicaid, we have almost 1,700 districts we provide support towards, and then another probably 1,000 districts where we are deeply embedded within special education and special needs programs.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm Andy Gall with Synovia CalAmp for about 7 years now, and I love working with our districts on identifying and solving the problems and the challenges that you face. So the last couple of years, we've been growing the interest and how to better, more efficiently and accurately report the Medicaid services that are being provided. And so hopefully today you'll see how some of our tools and your resources can be leveraged to make it an efficient process for you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy. So as you've learned already, Jessica and Andy bring a tremendous amount of experience to the table. I'm about to introduce Jeannie, and when I do, I'd like to do so with an extra bit of oomph. I'm a Navy veteran, and one of the things I love about the school bus industry and working with all these professionals is they remind me so much of the folks I work with in the Navy, in that they get up early, they work really long days, and they show incredible commitment to serving others. And I think Jeannie exemplifies those just in the brief time that I've talked. I've heard that same kind of commitment to doing the right thing and to serving others that I saw in the Navy. So with that, Jeannie, I'd love you to talk a little bit about yourself, your background, and what we're gonna learn today.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it. I'm Jeannie Chache. I've been with Loudoun County just over 3 years, but have a bit over 20 years experience with transportation. I was fortunate to be a network specialist with the federal government, and it gave me a pretty strong background as far as networking, both people-wise and communications-wise, as well as a pretty good understanding for database structure and integrity of data. While working with the county, it's been totally with transportation-related issues, and it makes a fascinating mix to be able to look at transportation through a technology scope. I've also been in personal protection and private investigation, and the key thing you learn from that is how to creatively come up with solutions, which I think we're all doing now with COVID, as well as being able to listen and understand people's perspectives. So I think basically all this, the different technologies we use for transportation, whether it be routing or fleet assets or AVL GPS information, gives us a dynamic ability to focus on what's important. And I think it's probably safe to say with everyone on this call, the safety, the dedication and commitment to our schools and safety of students is what's paramount and kind of what drives me to do what I do. And I love it.
Outstanding. Great introduction, Jeannie. Thank you very much. So with that being said, now that you understand the breadth of experience we're bringing to the table, why don't we dive right in? We're 11 minutes in, so now the introductions are out of the way. We're going to turn over to Jessica to talk about big picture and then down the details of how the Medicaid reimbursement program can work for you.
Great. Thanks, Brian. So to start out with, let's try to understand the context of what we're talking about. So on an annual basis, federal Medicaid actually reimburses school districts up to $4.5 billion for services that they are providing to special education students and students with disabilities. The interesting thing about that number is that that number could actually be much higher. And that would be dependent upon more school districts participating in the Medicaid reimbursement program and then also expanding the services through which they are submitting for. One of those services that districts can actually submit for is specialized transportation. And we'll dig more into that a little bit later. But transportation is an optional service that a state can choose to allow districts to get reimbursement for. To put it into context in terms of what districts are spending or receiving for special education support, right now, federal DOE, through their Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, so IDEA funding, that's $13.5 billion that's going back to school districts. And anybody who's worked within special educations or students with disabilities, you know that that $13.5 billion doesn't necessarily cover all of the things that you need to provide to those students. So special education and IDEA is usually referred to as the unfunded mandate. So things that districts look for are different funding streams that they can access to help support those students. And one of those streams is Medicaid funding. So as you can see, in comparison to the total dollar amount that the U.S. Department of Education is sending back to school districts for those students, Medicaid can actually represent a 30 to 35% increase overall for your special education programs in total. Next slide, please. While those dollars are out there for districts to access, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? There are requirements and there is some work that needs to be done in order to access those dollars. The other important thing to know is that although the federal government says, yes, this is a service that states can allow districts to be reimbursed for, the states actually have their own say over whether or not specialized transportation can be reimbursed at the school district level. So right now we see about half of the states across the country actually allowing for the reimbursement. However, we're starting to see states that don't have it as an allowable service right now actually expand their programs to get those dollars back to the school districts. So one example right now is the state of North Carolina, where over the past 12 to 18 months, it was actually the school districts that were very strong advocates going to the state, who then went to the federal government to say, hey, we want to expand our program and we want to look at getting reimbursed for transportation. On the right-hand side, you'll see a snippet from one of the state websites. So each state agency tries to do their best to provide all of the guidance they possibly can about what the requirements are for Medicaid reimbursement. And you'll see that there are dozens of links leading to all of these publications, which represent hundreds of pages of guidance. which districts are then expected to then go through all of those documents, read all the information, and then understand how to compliantly submit a claim to Medicaid. Understandably, this can seem a little bit daunting to some folks and may be a deterrent as to why districts aren't really diving into submitting for transportation reimbursement. Next slide, please. So what we wanted to do now is really get into the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about when we're thinking about submitting Medicaid claims to get reimbursed for transportation services. So first thing is it's important to note the population that we're actually looking at. We're looking at special needs students. So these are traditionally students who have individualized education programs or IEPs who require modified or adaptive transportation based upon their specific disability. So think about you need a bus that has a wheelchair lift because the student is wheelchair bound. You may need a specific vehicle because the student has severe respiratory issues, and so they need specific filters and air purifiers on the actual transportation to ensure they have a safe ride to school. So the population we're really looking at is a typically high-cost, high-need student base, right? These are the extra costs that you may be seeing within a transportation department because those students can't just ride a normal school bus. They have to have additional supports and additional modifications to ensure they have a safe ride to school. There are two general types of programs that districts can look at to get reimbursement from Medicaid. The first one is a fee-for-service program. And essentially what that means is you're tracking your ridership data, and then as you provide the trips, you are submitting that trip information to get payment. So it's an ongoing daily, weekly, monthly process where you're doing that documentation, capturing the ridership, and then submitting that documentation for reimbursement. In addition, there are a handful of states that have a cost settlement program. So in addition to being able to submit for those ongoing ridership logs, you can also submit an annual cost report that has additional information that you can actually recoup additional dollars. So the important thing to know within these two things is, one, each state has their own program requirements. So you'll see that in some states, they require districts to hand in that information within 90 days if they're submitting ridership information on an ongoing basis. In some states, it's up to 18 months. So it's really important that if you are submitting transportation claims, that you're able to do it in a timely and efficient fashion. The other thing is that the ridership information actually plays into both of those programs. So again, submitting those daily, weekly logs to then get them submitted to Medicaid for reimbursement. And then that annual cost report actually requires you to calculate all of the trips that you've delivered to those students who have those special needs. So it's important to have a process and a system that can capture that information on an ongoing basis. As you can start to think about, oh gosh, look at these program requirements, look at what we're talking about with data, you're probably coming across those initial barriers that districts bump up against, which is, man, is the time being spent capturing this information and keeping track of all of this, does that actually outweigh the benefit, the actual dollars that are going to be coming back? The second thing that might be coming up is, okay, well, I understand that we have these students with disabilities who are getting these services, and this transportation needs to be outlined in an IEP. I'm in a transportation department. I'm keeping track of different information like ridership data. Sounds like we may need to have cost data from our business office at some point. So if you're in a district where everything is running pretty smoothly in terms of communication and being able to get data back and forth to one another, this may seem like not a problem. But if you're in a district where departments may be siloed off, everybody has different priorities, it's maybe not efficient to be able to triangulate all of this information across the different departments. The last thing is that, man, these program requirements seem very complex. And if I'm starting to submit claims to Medicaid, I want to make sure they're compliant, which is absolutely correct. When you start submitting claims to Medicaid, that means Medicaid at the federal level then has the right to monitor and audit your program. So really, you want to make sure that you have everything in place so that you're hitting all of those requirements. So yes, there are the barriers, and you start to think through what does this actually look like for me at a district level on a day-to-day basis. On the flip side, however, is that in some states, when we are looking at the transportation claiming, it actually looks like it's 50% of the total reimbursement that districts are receiving. So in essence, by claiming for specialized transportation, we've seen district reimbursements double. So again, might be some barriers, but there's also quite a bit of reward. Next slide, please. So thinking about this in terms of really on the ground, what is this going to look like? I thought it was interesting to pull together a case study of a state where we're submitting claims for over 300 districts at the state. There's actually 600 districts in this state, and so you'll see only 300 of them are submitting for specialized transportation at this point. My guess when I was looking at the data was, of course, our largest districts in the highly urban areas are going to be the ones that have the highest transportation reimbursement levels. It just makes sense. They've got the population, they've got the numbers. These would be our biggest reimbursement earners. However, when looking at the data from school year 19, the district that was most successful in recouping costs for specialized transportation was actually a small suburban district of 7,000 students total. So we're not even talking about the special education population, 7,000 students total, and they received 3 times the reimbursement that the largest district in the state received, and that district is 25 times the size of this small suburban district. That was shocking to me when I looked at that, but it made sense because when we looked at their actual processes, they had a clean process that got data to the right people at the right time. It also made me a little bit sad to know that that large district had left a lot of dollars on the table for that year. So how do you get to a place where you really have an efficient and effective program? Most districts at this point are contracting with a company to help them with their Medicaid claiming. This is a company like PCG, where we help you with things like the IEPs, potentially plans of care. We look at documents like your consent to bill Medicaid, and then we take all of your data and we validate it against the Medicaid rules. And so we will tell you, hey, out of your 1,000 services that you've tried to put through this month, 100 went through, and these 900 are missing these pieces of information in order to hit the Medicaid requirements. What we really see with successful districts is that they're already submitting claims successfully to Medicaid. So their special education department has their speech therapist documenting, their occupational therapist documenting. They've got the process in place to capture all of that Medicaid information. And then layered on top of that is a transportation program or a transportation department that can successfully capture that ridership information for all students. And then you merge those two things together. So start out with a successful Medicaid program within a special education department, and then move to adding on that transportation claiming. So to kind of put into perspective what you could be looking at in terms of dollars, and again, this will depend on the state and how effective your program is, but we saw on average that it's $500 per student annually where we were successfully able to capture this information. So if you're in a district that has 100 buses and you have just 20 students that meet these requirements, then that equates to $10,000 in reimbursement. Now, $10,000 might not be a lot to some districts. However, if it only takes you a couple of minutes a month to download some ridership data, and then you send it over to another company who does all the data matching for you, if you spend in total half an hour thinking about it on a monthly basis, then that $10,000 seems like a pretty good return on investment. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Andy to go through Synovia solutions.
Thanks, Jessica. So we've got a couple of different ways to kind of tackle this, the ridership tracking piece. The most prominent is a tablet that sits on the dash of the bus, and it's attached to a barcode, either a barcode or RFID reader. The tablet contains a manifest of all of the students who are scheduled to ride the bus on every day. The driver, as soon as the student scans, they're able to get feedback about the verifying that student is a scheduled rider. So one, this is to help not with just the Medicaid reimbursement process, but to ensure the safety of your passengers, and that the right students are getting on and the right students are getting off at the right stop. So not only are we recording the ridership information, but we're preventing the lost child then as well. What we see typically in the special education trips is more often that the driver will use the tablet to select the students that are boarding. We have some districts that they would prefer that the student swipe their card, and it's a life skill for the student to learn and participate in the boarding process. But it is an option that the driver can select the child's name from the tablet then as well. So either one will record the student boarding or exiting the vehicle for each day. So what it really allows the driver to do is to, number one, focus on the safety process of the boarding and or exiting process, and they just have to ensure that the students are presenting a card if that's the option that they're doing. And the result then is that the transportation office is confident that every student who boarded or exited the bus was recorded. Some of the lost child scenarios are helped by knowing that no student could have gotten onto a bus without the activity being recorded. So allows for complete and accurate ridership data, and all of that process is allowed through the ridership scanning on and off. Go ahead to the next slide. So the critical pieces then for the Medicaid reimbursement, we have reports obviously for contact tracing and being able to identify who was on the bus with each student, and reports for load capacity and those kinds of things. But for Medicaid specifically, the critical part is to be able to match up each student, and by state you have different requirements for what kind of demographic information you need to include, and then who the driver was on each day, and then which students rode. And so you're able to keep track, and typically it's by month or by week in a grid format of every student that participated in ridership for those days. That single report, then you would run it and send it over to typically to your special education department to match it against your classroom attendance. And I'm proud of the fact that I've heard examples back from districts where those attendance information didn't match, and after they dug into it further, it was the classroom attendance that had the error, and it was 100% of the time the drivers recording and reporting on the student ridership that was the accurate piece. So having accurate ridership information is obviously is a key for where they loaded and where they were, the school they were going to for each day, to be able to get that information correctly communicated. Okay, Brian, I think Jeannie, you want to tell us about how you're using it?
Hi, thanks, Andy. We have approximately 822 buses, all outfitted with Synovia tablets and GPS. Normal times, we have about 82,000 enrolled, and we assign approximately 64,000 students to a bus. Again, during normal times on COVID, we start out at an interesting trend around 1,800 special needs students, and by the end of the school year, we're transporting about 2,500. And that's been the trend for the last 3 years. With COVID, we have about 1,000 special needs students on the bus right now, and we would love to encumber the money that is needed. Transportation in our county does not see it. It goes into a budget, and then it's used for our special needs kids. Before student ridership, we put a lot of responsibility on the drivers and the attendants. They had a piece of paper that listed a roster with the student ID, and they had to manually check yes or no, and they had to sign it. It's amazing just how much of that doesn't get done. It's a tedious process just to get the form, to download information from routing, to be able to provide the spreadsheets for the drivers and attendants to use. So there was a lot of room for entry. And then the second part of that was, once the drivers and attendants submitted the sheets, there was a body of people who had to input it so we could transfer it to Medicaid. We had a part-time bus driver as well as some operations and staff, and as well as call center folks who were inputting the information on a daily basis, transferring it, and then there was the need to track down the driver who may not have signed the form or provided the appropriate data. So there was a lot of issues that we had, and I should say we have tested this a lot. Prior to me being involved in this county, and I've been using Synovia for over 9 years, I think, we were testing with one bus, and well, that doesn't give you the information you need to do a pilot, so we expanded it to a couple of buses and ended up with doing a pre-COVID pilot of 30 buses. It was only special needs teams. I chose a smaller area that it's brand new, so the drivers, tried to put more impact on the drivers. It wasn't, good enough that they were in a new area. Let's throw some more at them. So I asked them to come in for training one-on-one. There's a lot of criteria that we needed to accommodate what Virginia needed for Medicaid. So a large part of the process prior to the pilot was working with our Medicaid counterparts. A lot of the process was to make sure I understood what they needed, and Synovia worked very well hand in hand with us. There were criteria for a year, thank you, Brian, for a year that we needed. We just couldn't figure out how to get it. And that was, well, what job type is it? Are they drivers, attendants, who's entering the information? And we were able to update that. So we threw another challenge at Synovia. We said, well, not only do we need this information, we need to be able to account for a student who may or may not be on the bus roster that we import from routing, and then go back to Medicaid and work through that. It was a lot of lessons learned, a lot of lessons in listening to what's needed, but we were able to get our drivers to use their unique PIN, which is handled through Synovia. Make sure we understand what our Medicaid office, who we were reporting to, needed, and just really listen, learn, and try to deliver what Medicaid office needed to encumber the money that is due to us, to the county. So there was a lot of lessons learned, a lot of ways to do things. I understand what I do in Virginia could be different from what's done in Indiana, but we got it done, and the pilot proved to be successful. My personal goal in what I get to do daily is to take the paper out of the driver's hands. I would love for them to be able to utilize their technology to show when a vehicle is passing their stop arm, or to appropriately account for who is on the bus. The takeaway from all this was pretty simple. Drivers loved it. They loved to be able to understand where their children were, and make sure they were accounted for on the bus. And, that prompted more decisions. So, you go to senior leadership. Okay, well, who's responsible for this? Do you want the driver or the attendant to do it? And, that focused on more questions that you just assume are pretty easy, but when it gets down to the nitty-gritty, they really need to be discussed, like, well, the tablet's near the driver, but the driver's responsible for doing this, where the attendant's responsible for doing that. There's a lot of dialogue back and forth. What we're experiencing now, I have the go-ahead to fully implement this from pilot to actual, is the connectivity with your routing system. What information are you getting? We need to make sure that the data is flowing back and forth accurately, efficiently, and timely. Again, listening to our customers, knowing what we need. It was cute when we were announcing that we were going to pilot this. I had drivers and attendants coming up to me saying, "Are you done?" Which was a nice feature, because we are all creatures of habit. We all have our go-to way to do things, and them desiring change was really important and could help our county greatly. The good news is, when this is fully implemented, we won't be dealing with the amount of children on a bus. We'll be dealing with the exceptions who their student may or not have been in the roster that was transferred over. We're dealing with the exceptions versus the full list of kids. And it's more accountable. I'll be able to help our Medicaid office report for audits. So we can go back through Synovia, pull the information that was on the bus, see the encrypted PIN and make sure that it was encrypted and the driver did all they did, and be able to provide them beneficial, timely information for audits. Synovia's value is intense. I mean, if people sit back and look at the information that Synovia supplies for us, or you go back to the slide where Andy showed the attendance, just looking at that, decisions can be made based on what's available. For example, I could have had the driver mark a student on the bus at the stop, or they could have marked them on and off at the school. That didn't make sense to me, whereas the Medicaid office didn't have a position on it. Fortunately, making the determination early to mark the student on at the stop helps us now with contact tracing. So if you do this, and I recommend an automated way to do it because there's so much more accountability and efficiency built into what Synovia has provided, it allows you to not coast, but be more accommodating to what we may face in the future. All the information we do, and I stole this from a former coworker who was a fleet supervisor. Nobody likes to be reactive. We all strive for proactive, but with a lot of the solutions that Synovia has provided to us, we can be predictive in what we do. We can stop issues before they become an issue. We can make sure pre-trips are being done timely. We can make sure that the equipment is connected. You'll see on the slide tampering on the white fleet. Sometimes we have a west area that gets a little bumpy and some dirt roads. They shouldn't, but it could wiggle. But we can at least ensure the integrity of our systems and the reliability of our GPS information just by taking a step back, looking at the information we have. Using work monitors are amazing. It could help dispatch to prevent a downed run because somebody wasn't on time. So a lot of value is built into what we can do now. It flows over into every aspect of what we do on a daily basis. I think that about sums up.
Outstanding. Jeannie, thank you so much. Obviously, a lot there. We try to pack it into 2 slides, but you can tell Jeannie's got years of knowledge there to share. And, the big takeaway is just accountability, efficiency, accuracy, timeliness, the things I think all of us strive for in our professional lives is doing things right the first time. And, that's what I'm hearing when I listen to Jeannie and talk about the process that they've developed and implemented in Loudoun County. Josh, we'd like to kick it back to you to take some of the questions that have come in. Thank you to the audience for being great listeners and put some questions there. Josh, can you tell us what those are, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Brian. So we have some time remaining. So for now, we will tackle the Q&A part of this webinar. So it looks like the first question we have here is, does Medicaid cover the cost of PCG's work?
Sure.
That sounds like a question for PCG. Jessica, please. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brian. So the way that most contracts are put together is that, and this is true with other Medicaid vendors, is that we're usually paid on a performance basis. So we'll wait until the reimbursement starts coming through from Medicaid, and then it'll be a percentage of that reimbursement. If that's not allowed in your state, there are some states that's not appropriate in terms of the way that they do contracts. We'll work with districts to say, okay, look, we think you'll get X amount in reimbursement and come up with a fee based upon that. But the answer to that is most vendors, I would say, typically go on a performance basis. So if you're not getting dollars in, they're not getting paid.
All right, and for the next question, does Medicaid cover the cost of upgrading school bus tech to help with this process?
I'll take a shot at that one, and if others have ideas, feel free to jump in. So the Medicaid reimbursement isn't necessarily tied to any particular program. So what I mean by that is that as districts are submitting claims for reimbursement. When those dollars come back, those dollars actually go into a general fund more times than not. From a federal level, there's no requirement that those have to go back specifically to special needs programs or specifically to transportation. So the district could, in fact, take the dollars that are coming back from the reimbursement and use those to pay for any upgrades or systems that they need to capture the information. There are other types of programs where you can submit specifically for the software costs, but typically what we see is that the districts will use the reimbursement that's coming through to help support the software, the technologies that they're using in other departments, which is great because Medicaid is just one slice of that, of what the purpose of those softwares are, and you get a lot of benefit from having that technology.
All right, great. And for the next question, are there any states where the funding goes back to transportation and not to the special education office?
Yes, and I think, again, from a federal perspective, there's no requirement that those dollars go back to a specific program. However, we do know that there are some districts or some states that have had that conversation internally amongst themselves to say, hey, look, in our district, when those dollars come back, this is how it's getting divvied up. Or from a state perspective, the districts have talked to the state to say, we want to make it a requirement such that at least 50% goes back to our special needs programs, or 25% goes back to our transportation programs. So what we've seen is that from a federal perspective, there's no requirements, and that those conversations are really being driven by local governments, districts, and the states.
Awesome, great. Now for the next one. Do we know what percentage of schools are claiming this now?
That's a great question, and it's a little hard to answer only because there's no national level reporting on all of this, and actually states aren't even required to report out on what the reimbursement levels have been for schools. So I'll speak from an anecdotal perspective in terms of across the states that we work in. I would say in a very active program, we're seeing about 50% of the districts participate in claiming for transportation. On the other hand, there are states where we work in, there's hundreds of districts, and we're saying maybe 10 of them submit for transportation. So if I had to average those things together, I would say probably it would be 10 to 15% of the districts that would be eligible to submit for this reimbursement. That would be my guess on how many are actually going through the process at this point. So lots of room for additional dollars to come through.
Awesome. Thank you for that in-depth answer. So now for the next question. Do you have a list of those states that allow Medicaid reimbursements for school bus transportation? The person who asked this question says they're in Oklahoma and would like to know if it is allowed in their state.
So I can say Oklahoma right now is not allowing for transportation reimbursement, but that is something that could be put on the table in terms of expanding the program. Again, I don't think there's any national compilation of each state, but I would be happy to take that as a to-do for PCG to put together a list, and we can provide it back out in the email responses.
All right. And the next question. This viewer asks, our state requires a daily detailed log to submit a claim for transportation. Is there a report that gives daily activity with one student per page?
There is a student history report that by student will show you all of the scans on and off per student. Most of the states that we've talked to, they want it by route or by bus, and then the roster for that bus, but you can also run the report based on a single student's history for that day or for a series of days, yeah.
All right, and for the next question, How much would a district expect to pay per bus to outfit it with the hardware needed to track ridership in the same manner that we saw today?
Our Bus Guardian package that we have today, we offer it at $15 per bus per month for the first year as a response to the COVID demands that we've been looking for, and then the following years would be at $45 per bus per month, and that would cover all of the tools that we talked about today.
Okay, and the next question, can a special needs student who rides a regular bus be claimed as Medicaid reimbursement?
So the answer to that is yes, if there is an additional modification or adaptive service or equipment that's on that. So just because it's a general education bus doesn't necessarily exclude that student. What would be Medicaid would be looking for would be, okay, does that student also have a one-on-one aid on the bus? Does that student have special restraints that are required? So if a general education bus works for that student and then there's additional modifications that are made, then yes, they would be eligible for the reimbursement.
And related to an earlier question, a viewer asks if this is allowed in the state of Nebraska.
Nebraska, I don't know offhand, but we will definitely get back to folks.
All right, and that looks like it was the last question. So that's all the time that we have for today. But for anyone who asked a question that wasn't answered, the Synovia team will be following up via email to answer your questions individually. We hope that you all enjoyed today's webinar. I want to again thank Jeannie, Jessica, Andy, Brian, and Synovia Solutions for today's presentation. I also want to mention that this webinar will be available on demand on the School Bus Fleet website at schoolbusfleet.com/webinars. Thank you and have a great day.